At my grandson's graduation, his mother started yelling. But I had the last word. I froze for a heartbeat, stunned by the volume and sharpness of her voice. The auditorium, filled with proud families and beaming graduates, seemed to shrink around us as her words cut through the air like a blade. She thought she could steal the moment, turn the spotlight onto her anger, and humiliate me in front of everyone. But she didn't know what I had endured, the patience I had cultivated, or the quiet strength I carried. I smiled inwardly, keeping my voice steady as I responded not with shouts, but with calm that made her fury appear louder than it truly was. Every eye in the room seemed to flicker between us, sensing a storm hidden beneath my composure. This wasn't just about a graduation speech or a fleeting insult. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and presence, and I had been preparing for moments like this for decades. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I wasn't always the composed woman my family now saw. I grew up in a modest neighborhood where hard work and resilience were not choices, they were necessities. My parents ran a small bakery, and from an early age, I learned the value of persistence, observation, and patience. Watching them navigate the challenges of running a business, dealing with difficult customers, and protecting what was theirs taught me that true strength is quiet but unshakable. When I married, life introduced new lessons. My husband was kind-hearted but often indecisive, leaving me to mediate conflicts and manage both home and family. It wasn't easy, but I learned to read people, anticipate problems before they arose, and act in ways that safeguarded the family without making enemies. Over time, I realized that influence isn't about loud declarations or dramatic gestures, it's about knowing when to act and when to wait. As the years passed, I built a life rooted in foresight and careful preparation. I cultivated relationships, strengthened bonds, and quietly protected my family's legacy. I knew the value of keeping certain knowledge and plans close to my chest. That insight became my armor against those who underestimated me, and it shaped how I approached every challenge, big or small. Now, standing in the auditorium, hearing my daughter-in-law's voice slicing through the air like a whip, I knew that everything I had learned, every skill I had honed over decades, would be tested. And for the first time in years, the moment had arrived where patience, strategy, and calm authority would meet outright confrontation. The question was not whether I could respond, it was how I would ensure that when the smoke cleared, the last word would be mine. Family gatherings had always been complicated. My son, Daniel, was a gentle man, full of warmth and pride, but he often avoided conflicts, hoping that peace could be maintained by letting things slide. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, on the other hand, had a presence that demanded attention. She was ambitious, outspoken, and unafraid to assert herself, sometimes in ways that rubbed the rest of us the wrong way. Their differences had always been manageable, but over time, small tensions began to accumulate, like hidden cracks in the foundation of a house. Vanessa loved our grandson, Michael, deeply, but her love often came with high expectations and a loud voice, one that could overshadow moments meant to celebrate collective achievement. I tried to maintain harmony quietly, stepping in when necessary but never imposing myself. My presence had always been steady, a subtle anchor, but Vanessa's growing confidence meant she was beginning to test boundaries, sometimes disregarding tradition or disregarding my input entirely. Even family events became exercises in negotiation. A simple birthday could spiral into disputes over seating, scheduling, or recognition. And yet, through all of this, I had learned the art of observation, listening more than speaking, noticing patterns, and letting others reveal themselves through their actions. It was in these moments that I understood true influence doesn't come from control, but from understanding people better than they understand themselves. As I sat in the auditorium that day, watching Vanessa prepare for her outburst, I could see the familiar signs, hesitation behind her confidence, the impatience that often led to mistakes, the belief that she could dominate any situation. And I knew that, just like in the past, careful observation and strategic calm could turn her boldness into her own undoing. The stage was set, and the family dynamics were about to shift in ways she had no idea were already in motion. The tension between Vanessa and me had been simmering for weeks, subtle but unmistakable. Every family gathering, every casual conversation seemed to carry a hidden battle. She would challenge my suggestions, question my decisions regarding the grandchildren, and occasionally speak over me during discussions. At first, I remained composed, letting her words pass while quietly taking note of patterns, timing, and vulnerabilities. At Michael's graduation rehearsal, the first real sparks appeared. Vanessa's impatience grew as she fussed over seating arrangements, microphone checks, and even the programs handed to guests. Every movement she made was loud and deliberate, designed to assert control and draw attention. I observed quietly, recognizing the overconfidence and impulsiveness that often accompany people who feel entitled to dominance. One moment stood out. She grabbed the program from my hands, insisting she knew better than I did how my grandson's achievements should be presented. Her voice was sharp, her gestures exaggerated, and the subtle disrespect stung. But I didn't react. Instead, I allowed her to continue, letting the small frustrations accumulate, knowing that impatience and pride could become a trap if left unchecked. Meanwhile, Daniel shifted uneasily between us, trying to mediate but hesitant to intervene. His inaction, though unintentional, gave Vanessa a false sense of power. And as I watched, I realized this wasn't just a family dispute, it was a test. Vanessa was attempting to dominate, to assert authority in a moment meant for celebration. But the more she pushed, the clearer it became that her strategy was flawed. Her loud assertions, meant to intimidate, only highlighted her lack of awareness, her disregard for consequences, and her underestimation of the quiet, patient presence I had cultivated over decades. And I knew that the moment of reckoning was approaching, the moment when her overconfidence would collide with my experience, and the last word would be mine. The day of the graduation ceremony arrived, sunlight streaming through the high windows of the auditorium, catching the glimmer of proud eyes and freshly polished shoes. The air buzzed with excitement, laughter, and whispered congratulations. My grandson, Michael, sat in the front row, his cap slightly askew and his smile radiant. It was his day, a culmination of years of hard work, and I had looked forward to witnessing it more than I could put into words. But Vanessa had other plans. She stormed in moments before the ceremony began, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She carried herself with a mixture of urgency and irritation, scanning the crowd like she was inspecting an army. I knew that look, the one that precedes an eruption, the one fueled by impatience and the need to assert dominance. It started subtly at first. A sharp whisper to Michael, a pointed gesture toward the seating arrangement. I remained seated, calm, letting her overconfidence dictate her own actions. But soon, the whispers escalated into louder words, then sharp accusations, drawing attention from nearby families. "You're blocking the view," she hissed at me. "You shouldn't even be sitting there." The suddenness of her volume made a few heads turn. Parents shifted in their seats, glancing between us, sensing the tension building. Some appeared concerned, others curious, as if witnessing the calm before an inevitable storm. I felt the heat rise in my chest for only a moment before settling it down again. Anger would have spoiled the moment. Patience, however, would be far more powerful. Vanessa continued, her voice rising. She began chastising me openly, recounting grievances from past events, from minor disputes to trivial disagreements. Each complaint was delivered with the confidence of someone who assumed she had power, who believed her perspective was not only right but unchallengeable. And yet, as I listened, I realized she had set the stage perfectly for my response. I took a deep breath, rising slowly to my feet. The room seemed to hold its breath with me, all eyes shifting toward the unfolding confrontation. I didn't rush. I didn't yell. I simply let the weight of my presence fill the space. Years of observation, patience, and subtle influence had culminated in this single moment. I could see Michael's eyes widening, his pride for his grandmother mingled with confusion at the public spectacle. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, measured, and deliberate. "Vanessa," I said softly, but firmly, "this day is about Michael, not our disagreements. If you want to support him, you will step back and let him shine." Her lips trembled, her eyes flickering with disbelief. The auditorium, once buzzing with whispers, fell into a tense silence. People began to notice the shift, the quiet authority that demanded attention without force. She had expected an outburst, a confrontation that matched her own volume. Instead, she faced composed certainty, the kind that cannot be shaken by anger or impatience. I took another step closer, holding her gaze. "Your frustration is yours to manage," I continued. "But your actions cannot overshadow the achievements of a young man who deserves celebration, respect, and encouragement. Michael's moment is not a platform for old grievances." Her posture stiffened, and she looked away momentarily, the first crack in her armor. It was subtle, but it was enough. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. My calmness, my deliberate choice of words, and the unshakable certainty in my presence had already shifted the balance. Michael beamed up at me, whispering, "Thank you, Grandma." His gratitude was quiet but profound. I smiled at him, squeezing his hand gently, knowing that the lesson he would carry from this moment was more important than any public spectacle. Vanessa, recognizing that her strategy had failed, retreated to her seat. Her voice lowered, her posture diminished, and for the first time, she appeared uncertain. The loud, commanding persona she had relied upon was no longer enough. She had underestimated me, and in doing so, she had created an opening that I had used with precision. As the ceremony resumed, I remained standing for a moment, feeling the tension ebb. The applause for the graduates filled the auditorium, blending with a sense of restored balance. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I knew the dynamics had shifted. Authority had not been asserted through volume or anger, but through presence, strategy, and the quiet execution of foresight. The breaking point had arrived, and with it, a realization that would ripple through the family long after the ceremony ended. Power is not claimed by shouting, but recognized through patience, composure, and the ability to act decisively at the right moment. And at that moment, in front of everyone gathered to celebrate my grandson, I had the last word without raising it above a whisper. After the ceremony, the auditorium emptied slowly, families chatting, graduates hugging friends and teachers, laughter echoing down the hallways. I walked alongside Michael, his cap now carefully placed under his arm, the excitement of achievement still bright in his eyes. The memory of Vanessa's outburst lingered, but in a different form, a reminder that patience and preparation could triumph in moments when chaos seemed inevitable. In the car, the drive home was unusually quiet. Michael chattered about his favorite professors, the small victories of the day, and his future plans, while I listened, occasionally offering a gentle comment or shared memory. Vanessa sat in the back seat, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the window, seemingly lost in thought. For the first time in weeks, I sensed uncertainty in her demeanor. She had expected confrontation, but what she encountered was calm authority, and the realization of her own misjudgment weighed heavily on her. At home, Daniel tried to mediate the tension subtly, suggesting we all have some snacks and settle in before discussing the events. I agreed, knowing that open dialogue in heated moments could be counterproductive. Instead, I let the atmosphere soften naturally. Michael's joy was contagious, slowly dissolving the lingering discomfort from earlier. I took a moment to reflect quietly in my own room. The adrenaline of confrontation had faded, leaving in its place a mix of relief, satisfaction, and vigilance. I had managed the situation without raising my voice, without escalating the conflict, and yet the impact had been profound. Vanessa had learned, in her own way, that overconfidence and impatience can create openings for others to act with foresight. Later, I watched Michael reviewing his graduation photos, the family gathered around, sharing smiles and laughter. Vanessa participated, but more cautiously, more measuredly. The shift in her behavior was subtle, but unmistakable. She no longer dominated conversations. Her gestures were tempered, and her tone carried a newfound awareness. The emotional aftermath had begun to reshape the household's dynamics, establishing a balance that hadn't existed before. For me, the experience was reaffirming. Authority, influence, and respect are rarely won through volume or anger. They are secured through patience, observation, and the quiet execution of strategy. I had shown, without spectacle, that measured presence carries a weight that impulsiveness cannot counter. And in doing so, I had protected not only my own dignity, but the joy of my grandson, preserving the meaning of the day for him above all else. As night fell, I reflected on the power of quiet resilience. The family had witnessed a subtle but decisive shift, one that would influence interactions for weeks to come. And I understood that my role as a grandmother was not just to celebrate achievements, but to guide, to observe, and to ensure that respect and balance endured even when challenges arose. The emotional aftermath was not merely about relief or satisfaction. It was about establishing an enduring sense of order, clarity, and understanding. The day had tested patience and strategy, and the results were now quietly, yet unmistakably, evident. The days following the graduation felt like the calm after a storm, though beneath the surface, subtle shifts were already taking shape. Vanessa's boldness had been tempered, and Daniel, seeing the change in both of us, approached interactions with renewed clarity. The household had settled into a rhythm, but I knew the true turning point was not just in the immediate calm, it was in the subtle power that patience and observation had revealed. I began to exercise a quiet influence, one that didn't require loud declarations or confrontation. I engaged Michael in conversations about his future, asking questions that encouraged him to think critically and assert himself with confidence. Vanessa observed, perhaps unaware that I was shaping not just her son's understanding, but her awareness of boundaries. Each small action reinforced the lesson: authority is recognized, not claimed. Meanwhile, I strengthened my presence within the household in ways that were almost invisible. I offered suggestions to Daniel, shared gentle reminders with Vanessa, and quietly supported Michael's decisions. The calm certainty in my actions began to create a framework in which the family could operate harmoniously. Vanessa, still adjusting to her diminished control, began second-guessing herself. The turning point was subtle, but undeniable. Her impulsive, domineering tendencies were now moderated by the quiet, steady influence I had cultivated. I also took time to reflect on my own resilience. Over the years, I had developed an intuition for reading situations, anticipating challenges, and preparing responses before they became crises. The graduation incident had tested every skill I had honed. And now, seeing the gradual shift in Vanessa's behavior, I recognized that the real power lay not in confrontation, but in the ability to act strategically while maintaining composure. At home, the family began to adjust naturally to this new dynamic. Vanessa still had her moments of assertiveness, but they were tempered by reflection. Michael displayed increased confidence, knowing that he had both support and space to make decisions. Daniel seemed relieved, grateful for the restored balance. And I, quietly observing, understood that patience, foresight, and the deliberate exercise of subtle influence had created a turning point that would endure far beyond a single day. The true strength I had displayed was hidden to many, visible only to those who understood the patience, planning, and presence required to act effectively in a tense situation. Vanessa's earlier outburst had been the catalyst, but the turning point was the way calm authority, observation, and quiet strategy reshaped the family's dynamics. And as I watched Michael laughing with his cousins in the living room, I knew that the real victory wasn't in a single word or gesture, it was in the subtle, enduring shift that would guide the family forward, quietly but decisively. The turning point had been achieved, but the next phase, where clarity and strategy would meet consequence, was only just beginning. With the turning point behind me, I began quietly crafting the next phase of my plan. Vanessa had learned, in subtle ways, that impulsive anger and overconfidence could not overshadow careful observation and calm authority. But I knew she would test boundaries again, intentionally or not, unless I set in motion a strategy that ensured clarity and respect would endure. I started by reinforcing the household structure without announcing it. I engaged Michael in conversations about responsibility, priorities, and decision-making. Not lecturing, not commanding, but guiding gently, letting him recognize patterns and consequences on his own. At the same time, I subtly interacted with Vanessa, creating opportunities for her to reflect on her actions, to encounter the natural outcomes of her impulsiveness without direct confrontation. Each interaction was carefully measured, every word chosen to nudge the family toward balance without overt control. At the same time, I began gathering small, verifiable examples of her overreactions, her disregard for subtle boundaries, and moments where her impatience had created unnecessary tension. I didn't use them immediately. Instead, they were like seeds planted in fertile ground, waiting for the moment when clarity would naturally emerge. The genius of the plan was that Vanessa herself would reveal these patterns in her continued attempts to assert dominance, leaving no room for denial. Daniel, oblivious to the strategy, began noticing the changes on his own. He saw that Michael was growing in confidence, that Vanessa's outbursts were less effective, and that a calm, steady presence commanded far more respect than sharp words. I let him arrive at these conclusions naturally, knowing that his understanding would reinforce the eventual resolution without forcing confrontation. The subtle twist of my plan was that it required no immediate action. I allowed Vanessa's behavior to continue just enough to expose her tendencies fully, while my own influence operated invisibly in the background. By the time the decisive moment came, the evidence of her impulsiveness would be undeniable, and the family would recognize the shift organically. I also ensured that Michael was aware of his own power in the situation, guiding him to make decisions with clarity and integrity. This was not just about confronting Vanessa, it was about cultivating the strength and understanding in the next generation, so that the resolution would be lasting. By the time the day arrived when I would act, Vanessa would have inadvertently built the case herself. Every impatient gesture, every sharp word, every attempt to dominate would reinforce the strategy one had set in motion. The twist was simple yet powerful. She would unknowingly validate my quiet authority and demonstrate to the family that influence comes not from volume, but from foresight, patience, and presence. I watched her carefully, noting her movements, anticipating her reactions, and remaining calm. The secret plan had been years in the making, born from decades of observation and quiet resilience. Now it was only a matter of time before it unfolded completely, and when it did, the result would be unmistakable. The family would witness not just the consequences of impulsive behavior, but the enduring strength of measured action. And when that moment arrived, I would have the last word, not through anger or drama, but through strategy, clarity, and the unshakable weight of quiet authority. The day of the second family gathering arrived, a more intimate setting than the graduation, but no less significant. Vanessa entered with the same sense of purpose, her confidence undimmed by the previous encounter. She had assumed the earlier outburst had been a momentary setback, that she could reassert control now that she thought she had learned what she could. But she didn't realize how carefully I had orchestrated the next steps, how quietly the groundwork had been laid to reveal the truth without confrontation. The room was warm with casual chatter. Michael sat beside me, his cap and gown safely tucked away from the commotion of the day, his smile still radiant from the earlier ceremony. Daniel hovered nearby, tense but watchful. Vanessa began her usual routine, directing conversations, suggesting activities, and inserting herself in ways meant to command attention. I remained calm, observing her closely, noting the impatience in her gestures, the slight rise in her voice, the subtle signs that she was unaware of how much her behavior betrayed her underlying insecurity. As she spoke louder, attempting to dominate the discussion about household plans and family activities, I finally interjected. But I did not shout. I did not argue. I simply spoke with the calm certainty that had already shifted the household's dynamics before this moment arrived. Vanessa, I said gently, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but it's important we consider everyone's perspective. The way forward is not through volume, but through understanding and respect. Her eyes widened, caught between defiance and disbelief. She expected confrontation to be met with equal intensity, but instead, she faced composed authority. I continued, calmly presenting examples of past decisions and behaviors, not accusatory, not personal, but factual and unassailable. The moments of impulsiveness she had displayed over the weeks, her attempts to control, her disregard for subtle boundaries, all unfolded naturally in the narrative I constructed. Daniel, finally understanding, nodded quietly. Michael looked up at me with wide eyes, pride evident in his gaze. Vanessa, for the first time, saw that her strategy was ineffective. She had built the scenario herself, every impatient word, every impulsive act, every overstepped boundary reinforced the quiet authority I wielded. She had expected chaos, but what she encountered was control without force, clarity without anger. As the conversation continued, the family began to recognize the shift. Conversations flowed more smoothly, decisions were made collaboratively, and Vanessa's gestures, though still present, became tempered by awareness. She no longer dominated, her confidence muted by the undeniable recognition of a presence that did not need to assert itself to command respect. The confrontation was complete, yet it had required no theatrics. There were no shouts, no dramatics, no visible victory dance. The power of observation, patience, and subtle strategy had spoken louder than any words could. Vanessa had revealed herself, her tendencies laid bare, and the family had witnessed the results organically. And in that moment, standing quietly, calmly, with Michael smiling beside me and Daniel observing thoughtfully, I knew the last word had been spoken not through volume, but through foresight, subtle influence, and unwavering composure. The confrontation was over, yet the effects would ripple through the family for months to come. Vanessa had learned, whether she admitted it or not, that true authority is not seized, it is recognized. And the next steps, the final resolution, were ready to unfold. The revelation came slowly, like sunlight breaking through a cloudy morning. Vanessa had begun to see the effects of her impulsive behavior, not through scolding or confrontation, but through the natural consequences of her actions and the steady presence I maintained. She had learned, quietly and unavoidably, that her previous attempts to dominate were ineffective when met with calm authority and careful planning. Over the following days, the family noticed the shift. Conversations flowed with more balance, decisions were made collaboratively, and respect replaced tension. Michael thrived in this environment, his confidence growing with each interaction. He began taking small initiatives, knowing that his voice mattered and that he could act with clarity and integrity. Vanessa, though still strong-willed, moderated her impulses. She asked questions rather than issuing commands, and she began listening rather than reacting immediately. Daniel finally exhaled fully, the relief visible in his posture and expression. The household, once a subtle battlefield, now operated with a new rhythm, one informed by awareness, patience, and mutual respect. I watched quietly, understanding that this outcome was more powerful than any dramatic confrontation could have achieved. Influence, after all, is more enduring when it is recognized, not forced. The true revelation, for the family and for Vanessa, was simple but profound. Authority is not defined by volume, dominance, or impulsive actions. It is defined by presence, foresight, and the ability to guide without aggression. My quiet strategy, executed with patience over weeks, had demonstrated this lesson in a way she could not ignore. She had participated in creating the evidence of her own impulsiveness, and in doing so, had allowed clarity and fairness to emerge organically. For Michael, the lesson was just as important. He saw firsthand that conflicts do not always need to be met with anger, that patience and strategic action often carry more weight than impulsiveness. He understood that leadership and respect are earned through consistency, insight, and thoughtful engagement. And for me, the revelation was deeply affirming. I realized that decades of experience, careful observation, and quiet resilience had not only preserved my dignity, but had also restored harmony to the household. I had secured the joy of my grandson's graduation, the balance of family interactions, and the subtle acknowledgement of authority that comes not from shouting but from measured action. The resolution was complete. Vanessa, now aware of her limitations and guided toward reflection, had learned the value of tempered behavior. Daniel, seeing the results unfold, felt assured that the family could navigate challenges with integrity. Michael thrived, secure in the knowledge that his achievements were recognized and celebrated without unnecessary conflict. And I, quietly observing, knew that patience, strategy, and the power of subtle influence had prevailed. The day's events had left a lasting imprint on everyone. The graduation, once overshadowed by tension and outbursts, had become a milestone not only for Michael but for the family as a whole, a demonstration that composure, insight, and careful action can transform even the most challenging situations into opportunities for understanding and growth. The house settled into a quiet rhythm that I hadn't felt in years. The echoes of Vanessa's earlier outburst had faded, replaced by a sense of balance, clarity, and mutual respect. Michael's laughter filled the rooms, lighter and freer than it had before. Daniel, relieved, navigated family interactions with a newfound calm. And Vanessa, though still strong-willed, approached conversations with consideration and thoughtfulness, her impulsive tendencies tempered by the subtle lessons of patience and observation. I reflected on what had transpired, understanding that the true victory had not come from a single word, a sharp retort, or a loud confrontation. It had come from years of cultivating patience, foresight, and the quiet strength to act when the moment demanded it. Life, I realized, often tests us not through grand gestures, but through small, persistent challenges that accumulate over time. How we respond, how we guide, and how we maintain composure defines not only the outcome, but also the lasting lessons we leave behind. The graduation day and the moments surrounding it had revealed an essential truth: authority is earned and recognized, not seized. Respect is not demanded through volume or dominance, it is commanded through clarity, integrity, and measured action. The subtle influence I had cultivated over the years, combined with strategic observation, had ensured that the family would recognize this naturally, without forced confrontation or resentment. Watching Michael thrive in this environment brought me immense satisfaction. He had learned firsthand that conflicts can be managed with composure, that patience often carries more weight than impulsive reactions, and that true leadership is grounded in thoughtful action. These lessons, quietly absorbed, would shape his understanding of relationships, respect, and influence for years to come. Even Vanessa, in her own way, had grown. She had witnessed the impact of her actions and the enduring power of measured presence. Though she would always retain her fiery nature, the household now operated with a new equilibrium, one in which awareness, reflection, and consideration guided decisions rather than reactionary impulses. As I looked around the living room, hearing Michael's joyful chatter and Daniel's calm commentary, I felt a profound sense of peace. The confrontation had passed, but its lessons lingered. I understood that the true measure of strength is not in the ability to shout the loudest or assert dominance at the moment, but in the capacity to act with wisdom, patience, and strategic clarity over time. The moral of this story is simple yet powerful. Life will present challenges, people will test your patience, and moments of tension will arise unexpectedly. But true influence comes from calm authority, careful observation, and the courage to act decisively when it matters most. The last word is not won through anger, it is earned through foresight, composure, and the enduring strength of subtle guidance. And so, as the evening drew to a close, I reflected on the day with quiet satisfaction. The graduation, once shadowed by tension and potential conflict, had become a milestone of understanding, growth, and recognition. The family had learned invaluable lessons about respect, patience, and the enduring power of measured action. And I, as the quiet observer and strategic guide, had ensured that the last word and the lasting impact remained unequivocally mine.